And we're continuing with An Acceptable Time by Madeleine L'Engle. I had an alarm on my phone go off as I was reading you the last chapter. We're still in chapter 1. We are in the Murray's kitchen, one of the most wonderful places in all of literature, with the Calubra siblings, Polly and Zachary, and the Murray parents. Mr. Murray has begun talking about an Ogham stone. We will begin from the last chapter, or from the beginning of the last paragraph. 3,000 years, he said, not much in galactic terms, but a great deal of time in human terms. Time long gone, as we limited creatures look at it. But when you're up in a space shuttle, ordinary concepts of time and space vanish. We still have much to learn about time. We'll never leave the solar system as long as we keep on thinking of time as a river flowing from one direction into the sea. He patted the stone. You found other Ogham stones? Polly asked. I haven't. Nays has. Nays, Polly might well be able to help out with the translations. She has a positive genius for languages. Polly flushed. Oh, Granddad, You speak Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and French, don't you? Well, yes, but... And didn't you study some Chinese? Now she laughed. One day, maybe. I do love languages. Last summer I picked up a little Greek. Mrs. Murray lit the 2 kerosene lamps which flanked the pot of geraniums on the table. Polly's being modest. According to those who know, her parents, her uncles, her ability with languages is amazing. Then, to Polly's relief, she changed the subject. Louise, you will stay for dinner, won't you? The doctor shook his head. I think we'd better be heading for home. Nays drives like a bat out of hell at night. Now really, Louise, Mrs. Murray said, I have a large mess of chicken and vegetables simmering over the Bunsen burner in the lab. We'll be eating it for a week if you don't help us out. It does seem an imposition. You're always feeding us, the bishop offered. We'll do the dishes tonight and give Polly and Alex a vacation. It's a bargain, Mr. Murray said. Dr. Louise held out her hands. I give in, Alex. Kate. She indicated the Ogham stone. You really take all this seriously? Mr. Murray replied, Oddly enough, I do. Celts, Druids, and all. Kate is still dubious, but we've been forced to take even stranger things seriously. Mrs. Murray headed for the door. I'm off to get the casserole and finish it in the kitchen. Polly shivered. It's freezing in the lab. Grand was showing me how to use a gas chromatography this morning, but icicles trickled off the ends of my nose when she sent me in. Uncle Sandy calls me a swamp blossom. Dr. Louise smiled. Your grandmother's machinery is all for show. Her real work is up in her head. I couldn't get along without the Bunsen burner. Why don't you go for a swim, Polly? You know the pool's the warmest place in the house. It was Polly's regular swimming time. She agreed readily. She loved to swim in the dark by the light of the stars and a young moon. Swimming time, thinking time. See you in a bit. She stood up, shaking a reluctant Hadron off her lap. Up the back stairs. The first day when her grandparents had taken her upstairs, she had not been sure where they were going to put her. Her mother's favorite place was the attic, with the big brass bed under the eaves, where her parents slept on their infrequent visits. On the second floor was her grandparents' room, with a grand 4-poster bed. Across the hall was Sandy and Denny's, her uncle's room, with their old bunk bed, because on the rare occasions when the larger family was able to get together, all beds were needed. There was a room which might have been another bedroom, but which was her grandfather's study, with bookshelves and a scarred rolled top desk and a pull-out couch for overflow. Then there was her Uncle Charles Wallace's room, her mother's youngest brother. Polly had a rather blank feeling that there was no room in her grandparents' house that was hers. Despite the fact that she had 6 brothers and sisters, she was used to having her own room with her own things. Each of the O'Keefe children did, though the rooms were little bigger than cubicles, for their parents believed that particularly in a large family, a certain amount of personal space was essential. As they climbed the stairs, her grandmother said, We've spruced up Charles Wallace's room. It isn't big, but I think you might like it. Charles Wallace's room had been more than spruced up. It looked to Polly as though her grandparents had known she was coming, though the decision had been made abruptly only 3 days before she was put on the plane. When action was necessary, her parents did not procrastinate. But the room, as she stepped over the threshold, seemed to invite her in. There was a wide window, which looked onto the vegetable garden, then on past a big mowed field to the woods, and then the softly hunched shoulders of the mountains. It was a peaceful view, not spectacular, but gentle to live with, and wide and deep enough to give perspective. The other window looked east, across the apple orchard to more woods. The wallpaper was old-fashioned, soft blue with a sprinkling of daisies, almost like stars, with an occasional bright butterfly, and the window curtains matched, though there were more butterflies than in the wallpaper. Under the window of the east wall were bookshelves filled with books and a rocking chair. The books were an eclectic collection, several volumes of myths and fairy tales, some Greek and Roman history, an assortment of novels from Henry Fielding's Tom Jones to Matthew Maddox's The Horn of Joy, and on up to contemporary novels. Polly pulled out a book on constellations with lines drawn between the stars to show the signs of the zodiac. Someone had to have a vivid imagination, she thought, to see a Great and Little Bear, or Sagittarius with his bow and arrow. There was going to be plenty to read, and she was grateful for that. The floor was made of wide cherrywood boards, and there were small hooked rugs on either side of the big white pine bed, which had a patchwork quilt in blues and yellows. What Polly liked most was that although the room was pretty, it wasn't pretty. Charles, she thought, would have liked it. She had turned to her grandmother. "Oh, it's lovely! When did you do all this?" "Last summer." Last summer, her grandparents had no idea that Polly would be coming to live with them. Nevertheless, she felt the room was uniquely hers. "Oh, I love it! Oh, Grand, I love it!" She had called her parents, described the room. Her grandparents had left her to talk in privacy, and she said, "I love Grand and Granddad. You should see Granddad out on his red tractor. He's not intimidating at all." There was laughter at that. "Did you expect him to be?" "Well, I mean, he knows so much about astrophysics and space travel, and he gets consulted by presidents and important people, but he's easy to talk to. Well, he's my grandfather, and I think he's terrific." "I gather it's mutual. And Grand isn't intimidating either." Her parents, she could visualize them, her mother lying on her stomach across the bed, her father perched on a stool in the lab, surrounded by tanks of starfish and octopus. Both laughed. Polly was slightly defensive. "We do call her Grand, and that sounds pretty imposing." "That's only because you couldn't say grandmother when you started to talk." "Well, and she did win a Nobel Prize," her father said reasonably. "She's pretty terrific, Polly, but she'd much rather have you love her than be impressed at her accomplishments." Polly nodded at the telephone. "I do love her. But remember, I've never really had a chance to know Gran and Granddad. We lived in Portugal for so long, and Beniceid Island might have been just as far away. A few visits now and then hasn't been enough. I've been in awe of them." "They're good people," her father said. "Talented may be a touch of genius, but human. They were good to me, incredibly good when I was young." "It's time you got to know them," her mother added. "Be happy, Polly." She was. Happy as a small child. Not that she wanted to regress, to lose any of the things she had learned from experience, but with her grandparents she could relax, completely free to be herself. She grabbed her bathing suit from the bathroom and went along to her room. Downstairs she could hear people moving about. And then someone put on music. Schubert's Trout Quintet, and the charming music floated up to her. She left her jeans and sweatshirt in a small heap on the floor, slipped into her bathing suit and a terry cloth robe, and went downstairs and out to the pool. She hung her robe on a towel tree, waited for her eyes to adjust to the dim light, then slid into the water and began swimming laps. She swam tidily, displacing little water back and forth, back and forth. She flipped onto her back, looking up at the skylights and welcoming first one star, then another. Turned from her back to her side, swimming dreamily. A faint sound made her slow down, a small scratching. She floated, listening. It came from one of the windows which lined the north wall, from the floor up to the slant of the roof. She could not see anything. The scratching turned into a gentle tapping. She pulled herself up onto the side of the pool, went to the window. There was a drop about 5 feet from the window to the ground. In the last light, she could just see a girl standing on tiptoe, looking up at her, a girl about her own age, with black hair, braided into a long rope, which was flung over her shoulder. At her neck was a band of silver with a stone like a teardrop at the center. "Hi," Polly called to the dark glass. The girl smiled and reached up to knock again. Polly slid the window open. "May I come in?" the girl asked. Polly tugged the screen till it too opened. The girl sprang up and caught the sill, pulling herself into the room, followed by a gust of wind. Polly shut the screen in the window. The girl appeared to be about Polly's age, and she was exotically beautiful, with honey-colored skin and eyes so dark the pupils could barely be distinguished. "Forgive me," the girl said, "for coming like this. Corrales saw you this afternoon." She spoke with a slight accent which Polly could not distinguish. "Corrales? Yes. At the oak tree, with his dog." "Why didn't he say hello?" Polly asked. The girl shook her head. "It is not often given to see the other circles of time, but then Corrales and I talked, and I thought I should come here to the place of power. It seemed to us that you must have been sent to us in this strange and difficult—" She broke off as a door slammed somewhere in the house. She put her hand to her mouth, whispered, "I must go. Please." She seemed so frightened that Polly opened the window for her. "Who are you?" But the girl jumped down, landing lightly, and was off across the field toward the wood, running as swiftly as a wild animal. And that is the end of chapter 1.